Thank you so much for meeting with us today. It's the 17th, right, of May, Wednesday, and we are meeting here with you to speak about performance, conservability, about all this amazing knowledge and concepts that you exposed us to over the past days. And we very much appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. As a member of Pacific Sisters and Savage Club Collective, which is active in the Pacific art scene, right? You engage with performance as a part of long heritage. Your performance practice often involves questioning traditional systems, conventions, and beliefs related to museums and conservation. Could you tell us where your interest originated and what motivates you?
I think the collective, the Pacific Sisters, that's been going now for 30 years. So definitely my interest started with the Pacific Sisters, and it started with us wanting to tell stories, our stories from the Pacific, the stories that were starting to sort of fade away. And in telling the stories, we started to also visualize a lot of what these beautiful sort of artwork, what our gods and goddesses would look like, because a lot of them are in the carvings, in the building, in the houses. So we've grown up with a lot of visual storytelling, but we were taking it onto the body, and so we started to not just make these beautiful sort of, I'm going to use the word costume, but it's really problematic because I always go costume, you have associations with something that's like costume jewellery, like it's not real, it's just fake. So there's all these terminologies. As we started to work, we started to find problematic. We didn't make costumes, we made beautiful sort of, we call them taonga, treasures, cultural belongings that helped aid the story. So everything that we made was like another visual cue to telling the story, but definitely in a modern, in an urban setting, so that it made sense to us. But there was definitely a lot of performance in the way we experienced it growing up. Was usually at cultural festivals, so there was a particular time and place that you did your performance, and then you took your costume off and put it away as you put your culture away. So we were interested in finding ways that we could make our cultural practice every day, something that wasn't sort of, that fitted in our urban environment. Yeah, so I suppose we started, we're looking at our own culture. There's a lot of personification. So, the personification of rain, and this would be a goddess. The personification of a rock, and this would be another goddess. So we were really looking at all the women that were missing in the stories. And so we started to personify these beautiful goddesses through our bodies. And as I kept sort of working with these beautiful storytelling notions, I really started to go, I'm not personifying, I started to look at the body as a way of sharing space, the same space with these. So I wasn't being like Hine Nui Te Po, who's one of our great goddesses of the night, but I was through my body sharing a space with her, so that actually I was bringing her into the now rather than just her being in the past, but actually bringing her in the now and working with her, alongside her. And by doing that, I think that's how I started to really look at what a Polynesian body is and what it does, because I think through that we realised that it's very different to a Western body in the way it looks, in the way it inhabits space, and the expectations of it. So we had to really deconstruct our own bodies to reconstruct them into something that we felt was appropriate for 21st century sort of Pacific sistering. Yeah, so out of the sisters, it's when I moved to England, and which has a great performance theatrical history. So I had to really find my place inside that, but it was through the storytelling. It was through the sharing of stories, old stories, not just new stories, but then by retelling them how we made them new. And so actually living in England taught me a lot as well, especially being outside a particular cultural context. So, but then finding the things that we shared. But there's a lot of body movements that are different. There's the way we adorned our bodies was different. And I found there was a lot of kind of, not lost in translation, sort of, exoticism. There was a lot of problematic issues that I then was starting to struggle with. And that's when I started to look at, and also I was part of a cultural group, and I noticed that really audiences, Western audiences, really, they couldn't tell the difference because of the language barriers between entertainment and ceremony. So this was another really big sort of issue that I started to kind of ponder, and how that sort of put our performance just always in the past, or some kind of quaint cultural sort of arena that's sort of unchanged. So through that experience in England, I started to look at that performance very differently, and I kept going, well, what are we doing? And that's when I started to look at some of our own cultural concepts, and then how that affected my body. And that's when I started to think about this VAR body. So, and really this, and what I'm doing, sharing space with the ancestral past rather than just reenacting it. Rather than just reimagining it, rather than reversioning it, to actually look at the body as the space that cohabitates the same sort of space, could be a different time, but the same space with those stories, so bringing them into the now. And that's when I saw the VAR and the activation. And that was a huge point for me, really, because it was through allowing myself to actually bring on board those cultural concepts. So I suppose now the VAR is really like it's, for such a little word, it has so many dimensions, and there's so many different forms of VAR. There's a social VAR, there's the VAR between the creator and the created, there's like, and it started to be used in an urban sense. So it has a different form in the village, but you know how some concepts transcend their places of origin, and how they can actually, it's in a way not what they were, it's what they become, especially within an active community. So so when we look at my experience of the VAR comes through the Samoan lens, but there's definitely all through the Pacific you will find this concept, and Japan, and lots of other, I've noticed there's lots of other places that actually have this term for this relational space that you develop and that must be sustained and then maintained. And that's sort of something I started to apply to what would a VAR body look like, because it was bodiless. And I suppose because I do a lot of performance-based body art, I felt the need to bring a body into the VAR, which sort of surprised a lot of my my mates. But it was, it's a developing thing, and for me, it really sets the difference between a performance and when I'm really activating a space from all that ancestral past. And don't get me wrong, because I do some great performances and I can be incredibly entertaining, but when I'm activating a space, that's not what I'm doing. So I find them very different to like when I'm doing spoken word, and you know, it's a lot more relaxed, and you know, it's a lot more urban, but when I'm developing these spaces that I'm creating to be close to my ancestral past, it's a very different sort of side of the performative experience. That was a ramble.
Rosanna, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about the Va body and how that has kind of developed for you and become something that you think about and something that you do.
The Va body has come about through being exposed to some of the great thinkers back in Aotearoa, actually, especially Albert Wendt, who's known in Aotearoa as a writer and a poet and a great intellect. He's one of our kind of great granddaddies of urban Pacific thinking. And then Albert Rafiti, a lot of Alberts in my life. And it was Albert Wendt in the 90s, he wrote this paper on the decolonized body. I can't remember what it was. This is like the most like kind of pertinent paper that we've all read. It's like all roads lead back to this paper that we all were like. And I read, and he was talking about, and this is at a time too where the tatau was really starting to actually start to kind of, you know, go through a renaissance, and it lost its shame, and people were, especially New Zealand-born Pacific Islanders, were reaching into their sort of their way of expressing their bodies, and the tatau was part of this, and you're starting to see it. And so Albert was thinking through what what a decolonized body would look like, and he started to paint a picture for us of this body, but he explained the Va in this paper. So it's a really important paper because it's the first time it was actually written. Because a lot of like times in the village, it's one of those where you just know it's there. You don't say it. You know, like, you know, oh, you know the Va, and they look at you like, well, what sort of Va? Like, what are you talking about? So Albert really framed it for us in terms of a space of relations, this relational space that binds together people and things, and that just stuck inside me. And because I realised there's a whole lot of my behaviour started to make sense in terms of how I act when elders are in the room, where to sit, and just even how you host people. There's all these responsibilities come with relationships. So that was, but he talked about the body, but he didn't actually say the words Va body. And then the work of another incredible performer, Lemmy Ponifasial, who has worked a lot in Germany, and he has a company called Mau, M-A-U. And Lemmy's a great philosopher as well as choreographer. And he talked about his performers working in the Va as ceremonial bodies. And so I started to kind of and then the third piece of the puzzle was Albert Rafiti, who's another one of our great Samoan thinkers, and he started to talk, he did this talk about the body as, now I always get this wrong, it's not like a genealogical body, but it's like a gene architectural body. He's an architect, but he was sort of, and he was the one that really explained the body as all the genealogical matter of the past. And it's like something in my brain just went, like a Va body. And when I told him that, he just looked at me like, he's like, oh, nobody's thought about that before. And I was like, oh, is that like wrong? And he's like, no, that's amazing. like, so he started to really, and by then I'd put the VAR in conservation, I had put the VAR in activation, and when I found the VAR in the savage, it was about 2010. By 2010, I was like, oh my God, there's a VAR, my son Salvador. I was like, oh my God. So so I was literally I was going, oh, this is amazing. It's actually at the center of these words, how we put the actual relationship first rather than the spectacle. So I've really sort of started to think of, people forget a lot of the work that goes into creating these really visual performative works. They forget that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of relationships you have to deal with, and then your responsibility to them after as well. And so that's what I was thinking in terms of how do we conserve these? And I was working in museums, and I was sort of, some people you meet and then you never meet them again. And for us in the Pacific, that's actually really rude. It's so rude. Like, don't you guys be thinking that? Like, you get it's like, so. And then I was looking at the way that, in terms of how they were wanting to conserve these objects in these museum spaces, and I was sort of, kind of, for me, meeting these, cultural treasures, they were really, so I couldn't articulate it at first. I remember kind of going, oh, it's like, wow, it's like my whole ancestral past has opened up and they were standing there with me. Like I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But then through this VAR body of genealogical matter, allowing the past to be in the present, I had one of those eureka moments. And when I work within the museum space, it's really different work than I do if like we're creating a work in a theatre space or creating a work in a gallery space. So it has really sort of different responsibilities that we have to enter in. And if you have a VAR body that is actually sort of sensitive to this genealogical past, there's our ancestors created certain, I suppose, rituals or ceremonies to actually, I call it cultural health and safety, so that you can ensure that the past remains in the past, and that your life here is for the present, but we can both take that shared experience we had and time together into the future. So there was a lot of times we would ask for certain things to happen, like to say karakia, which a lot of people have mistaken for prayer, but it's just, setting intentions, asking permission from the ancestors, and making sure that you're culturally safe. But of course, then a lot of that's really all that performance of culture stuff. It's still. So, it seemed like it was always these problematic spaces, or they'd be like, kind of like a lot of eye rolling. I've experienced a lot of eye rolling in terms of institutions trying to kind of cope with these demands of these sort of indigenous peoples. So, but I found that developing this language for them helped them. It helped them to understand that these weren't just performances, that there definitely was performativity. They might encounter song, they might encounter movement, but it wasn't a performance of the culture in the sense of the Western way that has been written about that, and they just. So, so it was a big journey that definitely the museum space hugely impact the sort of work I was doing with my body, because there were times like when I would be working sort of in the back of the stores, I would take music in for the ancestors. I would take music and I would be like, play them a thing, talk to them, and I'm sure these poor guys was like bonkers. They're like, But it was like, they were like, for lack of a better word, my audience. I was really redefining audience, and I suddenly realized that's what they were missing when we were, rendering ceremony in these spaces, to open safe spaces and close these spaces, was that they were thinking we were performing for them. But actually, the main audience was all the our cultural belongings that were, and you could go, they could kind of like, oh, I could really feel, they couldn't articulate what, because it was all that intangible thing that I think the VAR body renders tangible. When the hairs stand up on your things, that's, we call that, wehe. It's like, it's rendered it tangible, something that was intangible. I think a lot of performance, or the performativity, especially in ritual and ceremony, that's what it's mediating. It's creating these tangible experiences for something that maybe they couldn't articulate. Yeah, sorry, I always feel like I'm rambling. Yeah. And I think the part too, because the other part of my upbringing is street culture. I've come from the streets. It's like I haven't, a lot of my knowledge base has not come through Western higher education institutions. It's come from sitting at the feet of a tattoo practitioner. It's come from listening to the aunties while we're all sitting there making things. So, it's come from hip-hop gigs, it's come from drum and bass, jungle, it's come from, spoken word, from the, not quite the poetry slam. I was a little bit too old for that, but so it was sort of marrying up that my lived experience of an urban kid that's travelled the world to actually finding a way to make the past present for me, so that it's not something that you just maybe visit at a museum, or you kind of sort of, you bring it out and then you put it away. And that sort of really changed the way that I thought about, what is a performance and who am I performing for? And yeah, and who is it relevant to?
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because what you just said puts me in mind of something you said a few moments ago when you used the word costume reluctantly, and you said, costume is this, it has associations with artificiality, it has associations with theatrical occasions, it's something that you put on and then take off and put it away and go back to your normal life. And
it's like cultural drag.
Cultural drag. Yeah.
Which
right.
we love.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask, the one thing I wanted for sure to ask you about was your relationship to fashion, and now especially hearing you talk about, the street as an important culture for you as well. I'm wondering if fashion doesn't somehow, because fashion I think is meant to be, it's something you put on, but you put it on to become your authentic self, rather than to kind of put on a false identity. And so when I hear you talking about bringing tradition and bringing the past into the present, so that it isn't just a kind of artificial layer on the present, I wonder if fashion is something that has been a tool for you to do that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned fashion, because I'm an old frock. So and actually doing the thesis actually made me realize why I use the body. Because I realized that this body of mine has often been under the, mediated by a lens, or how others have seen me, not how I've experienced. So I was a very young fashion model in New Zealand in the 80s, and I travelled to Italy and Germany and did a little bit in London, a little bit in Australia. And it was interesting because that particular body was a really uncomfortable experience. And I think because of my Pacific upbringing, where the woman word and age and respect for elders was, you know, was seen, and big bodies was seen in a really different light. So to my Samoan family, I was way too skinny. They used to just look at me like, you know, like really. So I wasn't considered beautiful to them. And yet in this Western sense, you know, it was sort of like, you know, I measured up, I was fine, you know, finer featured, sort of, you know, lighter skin, just, you know, just dusky enough. So in that terms, you know, and you became the coat hanger. And it wasn't, there was no, it didn't matter what I thought, you know, and then you would, but there's this quite a certain bit of performativity in actually modelling. And I was really young, and you're still just finding your own body as well. But yeah, all I knew is I had a distinct uncomfortableness with that industry. And when I went back to New Zealand, I think after I got told that I was too old and I was 19, because I was going to be 20 soon. So I remember just sitting there like going, wow, okay. So I did go back home to New Zealand, and I started to look at all these amazing Pacific bodies on the streets, and they weren't being reflected in the magazines. So that sort of made me sort of create our own platforms through a magazine called Planet Magazine, which was an urban street magazine that started up by 3 young guys that happened to live next door to me, and they kind of knew that I hung out in the fashion world. So we bought literally the streets to, you know, I'd literally with a Polaroid take pictures of people, and we would, you know, do these fashion shoots, but with like really diverse bodies, you know, and it was fantastic because I really found that place. And we used to do these crazy fashion shows, like they were nuts, and I think that is part of culturally, our dance and our storytelling is often through, yeah, the whangongo that I talked about. It can be sung, it can be danced, it can be sort of lamented, it can be chanted. So I think as a culture, hula used to be the original form of prayer. And it was the way that you talked to the atua. It wasn't entertainment. So I think as Moana Pacific bodies, we're really used to moving to tell a story. So like just walking down a catwalk, that's just not going to cut it with us. And a lot of the young kids and us would use certain movements that was just natural to us. So it really became a much more theatrical space. And we were doing these shows sort of in nightclubs, and then we started to get invited to cultural festivals. So you'd have, you know, one platform where it was still very strictly regulated to the moves that you can do, must be traditional, you know, and there was a big separate stage for this kind of contemporary sort of forms. So it was really exciting times, but it was because we needed to see reflections of ourselves. That's a classic through identity. So but those early performance days, like that's where I cut my teeth on how to merge the two together, and actually so that it could be street, and it could be cultural, and it could be 24/7. It didn't have to be put away in a little box. And yeah, those days actually led to some of the deep thinking. But even as a performer, like it's quite funny. I still find myself falling into that trap of, oh, I'm too old to perform now. You know, and then I'm like, shut up. You know, like the Western construct is telling you that. I have to still fight it in my head, going, no, it's okay. You just, you know, you've got some stories to tell, and this is how you tell them, through the body, through movement. and then people go, "Are you a dancer?" It's like, no. So I've never quite find the right box to sit in terms of the Western concept of performance. Even live art, it's like it's still not a thing. Yeah, it's problematic on many levels. You're dancing queen. I know, that's some early history, when the dinosaurs roamed. But I think a lot of those times, so they literally, like for me, stole from my body movements, chants, and songs, and so then that transition from the 20s, when I could actually just start to inhabit that VAR body, is when I could really start to actually express myself outside those boundaries of a theatre or a gallery and even a museum. So, but I still find all those platforms really important and really valid. But it's that ability to be able to flow through them all, and not just be that guy that performs in a theatre, or just be that guy that's in the museum. So I think performance, through the performance artist worldwide, is really, we are the ones that are starting to enable change, because it is not coming from top down. And it's still, and it's, it's expensive. It takes a lot of people. It's a lot more work than putting a piece of art on a wall. Sometimes I wish I could do that. It's like, why can't I just stick a painting under? Even if I do like a photograph, I've got to activate it, I've got to deactivate it. Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I'm very interested. Could I pick up this idea of the attire, of the body decoration? I mean, we saw the photographs of your studio, and it's beautifully adorned with different pieces of textiles, with different colors, and it's just wonderful. I wonder, in our kind of thinking about conservability of events, performances, and in the intangible tradition, the physical still plays somehow a role. And I wonder whether, the costume, for the lack of better word, but coming back to this idea, whether this is something that you prefer to keep, do you remake it every time for the purposes of new, performances, taking part in festivals, and so on and so forth? What happens with the physicality of the stuff that you are wearing?
Yeah, see, originally, when you're using natural fibres, so that's a lot of our, and this runs true throughout all of the Moana and a lot of indigenous cultures, when you're bringing onto your body aspects from the natural world, you're not just embodying them, but you are becoming one. Like, so there's, if I'm wearing, a tusk, that's sort of bringing on the power and the mana of the boar. Or if you're wearing the flowers, then you're bringing on the scent and acknowledging the forests and the natural world. So the natural world was a really important part of how we communicated with our surroundings. So of course, once they would be finished with, they could then just go back into the earth, and you continue that cycle. And so cut to an urban situation when we don't have access to a lot of the natural materials that we had access to, they become all precious. Like we're not prepared to let them rot because, you know, we might have had to get them, you know, an auntie might have brought them over. You know, I use a lot of seeds and a lot of tusks and teeth and bone. So, you know, these each, you know, are kind of crafted, you know, some into really long ones, sort of lasting ones that you know you're going to hand down generations, and some that can be disposable. So it gets really hard in New Zealand. We're starting to use a lot of materials that are not going to biodegrade, and then our responsibilities to especially with plastics and other materials. So we've become, I don't know, part hoarders and part, so, but I suppose the natural cycle of some things that are easily replaceable, and we know that we can just go over to you know, you actually grow your own basically. So you have access to a certain flower and a certain tree. And then, you know, so you can be a little bit more flippant with them, but at least, you have to return them back to the earth. You don't just throw them away. And then with our other materials, I'm not sure, in the studio you might have seen a big shark's jaw, and that's, you know, that by wearing the sharks, there's a really special sort of that's where I came up with the new Aitu, because that's where I was like, can't say costume. Because the shark is a really important ancestor. So when I'm wearing the Emilie Taniwha is his name. So they've all got names. So this is where they really have their own charisma. They've got their own person. And when I wear them, that's where I'm sharing space with the times that when our ancestors, we descended from sharks. And now through overfishing, like, it's getting harder and harder and harder to be able to, one, find the resources, and it makes me so sad that a lot of our resources are just getting harder and harder to find. So I've gone off on a tangent here, but the shark, and again these incredible stories, the tautai, the fisherman, and he would go alone in a canoe and he calls to the shark, and then the shark will respond and present himself to the fisherman, and they, it's like they've got an arrangement, and then he will get caught and then taken to the village, and so it's so different to how fishing is now, where great big ships come in, and I've forgotten how many sharks are killed. It's like tens of thousands of sharks are killed every day, and a lot of times their fins are cut off, and then the rest of the shark is just thrown into the ocean. And so now when maybe I will bring Emilie Taniwha, when I will bring him out, people start accusing me of all these sort of things, because sharks are disappearing now, and it's just like, I was like, wow, we've really lost our relationship on so many different levels with these natural resources. So it's so I've become really, I've just lost my train of thought. I was thinking of my sharky. Especially, you know what? He got confiscated off me once. The last time, so I had to sit there, and they're like, so how long have you had him? I was like, it's just like the Kazi caught him, man. I was just like, but because I didn't have a receipt to prove that, I had to, but I did in the end. And it was really interesting, but I was showing them the photos of how I used them. They were looking at me like, oh, it's kind of weird, but okay. But yeah, I suppose though that materiality, so over the years I've developed all these new I twos. So, and they do, when they show wear and tear. Back in the day, they would dissolve back into the earth. But now, I don't want to chuck them out, because then so that's when I started to look at the museum. It's actually a really useful space. So that's when I started to look at it like a retirement home for my new I two. But I won't sort of let a museum sort of buy them or purchase them. And even because it's like, I'm like the Tautai. We have an arrangement where they become the kaitiaki, the guardians of them. And there's definitely a commodity sort of exchange, which sort of helps me as an artist. So when I let them into the museum space, that's when I started to think of this concept. I was really inspired by the Avatar, the Airbender, that film, and the young Avatar. He's the mediator between the spirit worlds, and then when the second Avatar came along, and she was a girl, and I was like, oh my God! I was like, of course. And there was a scene, and it's got the Avatar, and then it's just in that spiral of time with all the ancestors from thousands of years ago. And that's when I was just like, oh my gosh, I just need to create avatars for my new I too, because they are reincarnations of that story, of that, they're holding that same space. So the avatar, and that's why I have this exchange of moli. So this cosmological energy that is sort of, that can be moved. So I will sell them I suppose performance remains. I find that quite useful, is actually. But I used to say residue. To me, it was like the residue of the performance. So I will sell them that, but I will not sell them the moli. That can't be bought. And that's when I started to actually really create, I suppose, ceremony for it to be exchanged, because it's an intangible thing. And then that moli, just like the avatar, is the same same person but in a different body. So I could totally relate to that. And then the avatars can keep, and to me that's conservation, because you're actually conserving. What am I conserving? I'm conserving the story and the moli. And then the museum, they can conserve the physicality of the remains. And hopefully one day it may come into contact with another body again. And that sort of moli can be kind of reactivated, because it's left, there's a bit of residue in there. It's like when people fight, they feel really connected to certain things their grandmother had. And so it's that sort of same concept. Sorry, I'm going to burp.
Could I just ask something else about this notion of conservation that you just mentioned? I know that you have a very specific one, which involves the va in it, right? Not the va body, but the va concept. Could you explain to us what conservation is?
Putting the va in the conservation. So I suppose that the concept was sort of, I started to develop when I was really looking at the responsibilities that come with relationships, and how some relationships come and go in your life. Some you need to work at quite hard, and some you decide that's worth it. Some disappear. Some relationships you won't see for 20 years, and you just meet them again, and you're just, so there's those. And for me, the museum space, as in the whole galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, I'm just going to use museum, because they're so focused on the physical materiality, they forget about the actual sort of living essence. And I think that's because a lot of times they're dealing with a lot of things that don't have living sort of connections anymore. Like maybe the artist has passed, but but then the relationship just stops. They don't have a relationship with their families, with the living descendants, and it's really hard, as are relationships, but I really feel that we really need to start acknowledging that these relationships are central. They're not just, that you can't pull them apart from the actual physical thing. It's the physical thing, and it's attached to a human body, a VAR body that has all these, ancestral ties, and also ties that you develop as you're working with an artist, and a performer. So for me, putting the VAR and the conservation is really ensuring that the relationship is at the center of what you're trying to conserve. And if the person isn't alive anymore, there should be ways that we can work together to ensure. It's like having a good will, I suppose. But I think before it really was a commodity-based thing or a saviour thing. They're saving, they're saving this building, or they're saving, a statue, or it's been stolen. Some things have really problematic histories. So I think museums and archives, that the responsibilities they hold to a living community, it just doesn't cut it anymore when they go, oh, I don't know, we're in Switzerland, we don't have any, we don't know any Pacific Island people. For me, that doesn't cut it anymore. Not with technology, and it is, considered extra work. It's not considered part of the work. That it should be something that's naturally there, not extra, something that is, and until it's actually acknowledged as a really vital part of conservation, then we're not going to move forward. I mean, it definitely is changing. I've seen things change dramatically in the last 15 years, but it's not even. You'll find it a really good example of practice in one museum, and in the same city, 2 museums down the road, nothing. So that's this uneven platform that we're constantly working with. So and a lot of the artists or the communities, they're doing a lot of the legwork. They're doing a lot of the emotional work, and they're creating the frameworks, and yet that's still the power base is still in the institution. And I find that that's something that, I suppose projects like this are really important, because it is the world we live in. We do need to have ways of measuring, ways of qualifying, so that institutions or people like yourselves, when you go into other places, that you're taking these ideas and you're being able to manifest them inside the structure of the institution. And that's hard work, right? I mean, look at, AI's just gone bonk, where is that going to take us? But there's still some things at a physical level that need to be maintained. And you can't, and the human-to-human contact is going to be more and more challenging as we move into the 21st century. So that's why our storytellers are really important, right?
Natural resources that are disappearing. And even though we use the same word, nature conservation or cultural object conservation, at least in the Western understanding, we struggle to bring them together. We even sometimes oppose them because you have natural resources being destructed for the sake of saving cultural resources sometimes. And I wonder if the conservation is something that can bring both together instead of seeing that as opposed. Or as just 2 different things.
Yeah, it'd be I would love that to happen. And actually, it's really interesting that I feel not heartwarming. That's like, but like even the fact that you've picked up on the fact that there's this other way that you can look into conservation, and in a way it was just it was not a simple trick, but just by highlighting these two little alphabet letters in it, but and sharing the time and space together, we start to see the value in that, and then that responsibility, then you can't get that out of your head, right? So then that hopefully will trickle down and into, but that's just still at an institutional level. When we're talking about natural resources, it's we're fighting huge multi-million-dollar companies that have no want or need to kind of listen to the small fry like us. At the moment, the Cook Islands have just, they've sold a whole lot of licenses for, under, seabed mining. And apparently we've just found out there's 4 being sold around Aotearoa, around New Zealand. So it's like, I think it can get overwhelming. But that's why it's like we can start small, and that's all we can do. Sometimes is just one little project at a time. Otherwise, I get overwhelmed, and then I can't cope. But yeah, it's just resetting values inside these structures, and I think the world's getting ready to. But I think that's been a lot of hard work of Indigenous people keeping up the fight for like generations and generations and generations. So it's not an easy thing to kind of to see happening, but I know it can. Even if it's at a small level, like my Sharky. It's just like, it's my nickname for him. And I just gendered him.
Can I pull on some threads that you've been kind of spitting for us? You were talking about natural materials and traditional materials. You were talking about performances that you did that, from what I understand, were kind of part of your coming into yourself as a young person, as a young artist, that helped you get a new relationship to fashion, costume, garments, kind of things that are put onto the body, and also then how that might fit or not fit into the museum, because you said something about these crazy fashion shows that you did, and that's something that doesn't fit in a box. And then I'm reminded of, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Ganang-Ganeer?
Oh, Ganang-Ganeer.
Ganang-Ganeer. Which, I don't know, I hope you're not tired, you're sick of talking about it. I know it's a well-known project of yours.
It's like, I know I got a big soft spot for Ganang-Ganeer. It's like
And I just, I'm so... Also, I wanted to ask, the outfit you were wearing yesterday, were those pieces of tapa on your jacket?
Yeah, and it was the first ever Savage Club patch that I made my own self out of parcloth.
Yeah, and I read something in your master's thesis about how Ganang-Ganeer did enter an institution and does, live in a box, but also that you were able to go with a sister of yours who
Oh, that was just because I don't fit it anymore. Actually, that was interesting because it's the first time I actually sold something to anybody basically, and I was like, oh wow, maybe I really am maybe I could be an artist. Oh, I don't know. But yeah, because Ganang-Ganeer, there's a lot going on in Ganang-Ganeer. So it's like one that's sort of part of the queer talk of the 50s and 60s, but with the Pacific Sisters, some of our girls sort of pass that language down to us. So, and it was quite interesting because we didn't realize it was actually, like a real coded, queer sort of thing, even though the people that were passing it down to us were, but it's just all normal to us. So it was like, yeah, and also at the time, the mongrel mob or gangs are actually have a huge presence at home. And it is sort of, marginalised, loss of culture, loss of land, loss of language. So the gangs really became these families for a lot of our people, and and a lot of us grew up in it wasn't small fry, but a lot of them, especially I noticed they'd patch up all their jeans, and that was basically started off because they couldn't afford to buy another pair. So they were sort of, and the story with the mongrel mob, especially the one that I was sort of like, they got the name, but because the judge, the two guys who started it, they were at the thing, and the actual judge called them mongrels. They're nothing but mongrels. And I was brought up being called a mongrel too. It's like, afakasi, half-caste is sort of a name that we kind of gave ourselves, sort of not really kind of thinking about. When I got to England, they were like, "Oh, Rosanna, you can't call yourself like a half, what?" But I was like, "Yeah, well, it's better than mongrel," which is what, was this term. So when I had those jeans, we used to find the bark cloth was it was so precious, but a lot of the islanders would, we have these organic days where you could chuck out anything organic and the council would pick it up. And I used to find big tupper cloths out in these throwouts. And so I would, and I started to like cut out all the good pieces, and then I started to kind of also sort of, the patchwork is something that the missionaries taught the island ladies, is, to show them how civil and how useful they could be through these things. So I sort of, not being the most delicate sewer, I started to sew these jeans in terms of acknowledging the mongrel in me. And so they really were quite a statement. And sort of it was my way of sort of like forming my own gang, but it wasn't a scary gang. I was just like totally ganangania. Yeah, so also like turning that on its face too, because gangs are hyper masculine. They were hyper masculine, and we definitely sort of, so I was really playing on a lot of ideas of my own identity as a mongrel, but as sort of like what happens when you can create something whole out of a whole lot of patched up pieces, like, and that's when I was like, it's a whole piece. So that's when I was really looking at this. You can't kind of it may be all patchwork, but it all makes a complete garment. It's not half of, in terms of a half caste, it's not walking around with one leg sort of missing. So so when that ended up and that did a lot of work. In fact, they even went missing for 2 years. They just went off in the nightclub one night and never came back, and then they just came back. So they've had their whole adventure. I was like, I don't even know what they did. Yeah, so I was ready to release them. Like they'd done their time. Yeah, and I repatched them. So they're so heavy. Like in the end, I could hardly wear them. But so I was like, oh no, I was ready to kind of release them. And in a way, that was the genesis of my thinking now, because I couldn't just sell them to the museum, and I found my little handwritten piece of paper, which was like, basically saying that yes, they could now, come and live at this museum, but I expected, visitation rights. I was like, and that bodies needed to be in a body every now and again, and that I, yeah, and then of course it kind of got forgotten in years, and it was in Melbourne, and so one year I was in Melbourne and with two of my friends, Liuli and Angela, and I asked if I could see them, and then I sort of not hoodwinked, but it was great because next minute they were on bodies, and it was like a coup. But I knew that because I had asked before, and they were like, "Oh no, you can't do that." But when you're actually standing there, and again that relationship comes in. By then I developed a good relationship with the curators. I think she finally understood that we weren't going to do that. I was not going to harm something that I had made. That it was not in my best interest. And so when we were together, and I just casually mentioned that it would be great to get and it just happened. And so the photographs we've got are just all off our phones. But it was wonderful, and they gasped when they saw them on a body. They actually gasped, and I was like, that is what you're missing. That's when I give my conservation lecture about what are you trying to conserve. I was just like, are you trying to conserve the physicality of the garment, or are you trying to conserve a moving, breathing, like sort of experience, like an embodied experience, and seeing it move and seeing how it rounds around the body, and also the oils from your body relax it, and it really changed this woman's way of looking at care, and what is condition. And years and years later, I was sitting in a conservation symposium in UCL, and I've got to get this man's name. He was one of the older guys, and I must admit I was really like cynical, and I was like, oh yeah, mate, he's going to be like the don't touch and don't breathe on it, and he did this amazing talk on condition, like how they do condition reports, and he was like, and he put up these bottles of conditioner. He was like conditioning your hair, all these amazing sort of analogies and metaphors, and I was just like, oh my God, thank you. Like he was like, condition's something you do to your hair. It's not something that you analyze a cultural treasure. So I knew there were some sparks out there. But what you guys are doing is really even more. It's like it's taken those conversations. I think it's sort of in terms of I think I started performers. At the end of the day, we earn a living. We got to earn a living, and a lot of times, the performance is a very hard commodity to buy. So then you start kind of going, oh, well, I've got these photographs, or I've got this video, or I've got these garments. So those sort of the residue, which is I thought the remains is interesting for me. It's like this residue, this physical residue that could be like the commodity. Like I'm talking real basics now, and survival as an art practitioner in terms of conserving my longevity as a performer, so that I can do things again. So I was like, oh my God, what was I just talking about? It was going somewhere great. It was like, why it's important to talk about how we conserve performance. Because I've never really, I think a lot of the performers is like, we're in it. We're not, we're either trying to survive, or we're developing a work, or we're making a work, and then what? And then you're expected to think about what's going to happen to the work afterwards. It's like, do we have to think of everything? like there's a lot going on. So, I can reflect back because I've had a 30-year practice now. So I've kind of been able to take time to actually reflect back and really kind of think, I'm glad I kept those things, but it's not the actual kind of that particular time and space in terms of the duration or the, what do they call them, time-based experiences. Yeah, I think that there's this essence that they can't purchase. There never will be, even if we've really developed clever ways for them to kind of reenact and revive. And I was like, that's a nice little. There's a lot more of that happening, where it didn't really happen much before, but I think now that the performance arts has got, I mean, when did it really sort of start? In the 60s? In terms of a actual, I mean, just in terms of an art thing, right? You know, it's been around for centuries, thousands of years, but in terms of like the Western art kind of performance. So we're still quite young in terms of art, and now they're used to, like, yeah, they know what to do with a photograph, they know what to do with painting, they even know what to do with costumes, you know. So yeah but yeah, how do we actually get that essence? And for me, it was through developing these avatars, and I only really got to that point through doing my masters, when I was just like, oh my god, that's what I've been doing, because I did Ganangania in the 90s, and then he got retired, and then I didn't have, and then I was like, I missed him so much that I made another pair, and then another museum wanted to buy them, and I was like, and I happened to want to go to, long story, anyway, yes, you can have them. I sold the second pair too early. For me, it was almost like taking a baby off the breast too soon. I hadn't like, I weaned them too early. They weren't charged. I weren't fully charged with all that moly and the mana, and it shows when I've seen them exhibited, like to my eye, I can see that they're like not quite charged enough. So I profusely apologized to them and promised I'd be back later. Yeah, and then I made a third pair. So they were called repatriation, and that's why I felt they could go into the museum, because they were repatriation. So, and then the third pair is now living in a museum as well. And I've realised I never go past 3. There's something about 3 is the magic number for me. But it wasn't until I did my thesis that I realised that that's what I'd been doing, creating these avatars, and that these avatars were then sort of, charged up with the moly. And that's something that they can't sell, that intangible stuff. But it's just, to me, it's like in a suspended state of an animation, so it's not like they're fully deceased, because the next time a body, and I feel like it doesn't even have to be my body, that actually, when it gets a body inside it, and it starts to get that relationship starts, and that's where this conservation process starts, because we're conserving the moly and the mana of the garment, not just the physicality of the garment. And and Ganangani started that off. And I'm about to do, Backhand Maiden, the first backhand disintegrated. I left her in England, and I must have been about 2 years later, I must have gone, oh my God, where's Backhand Maiden? And I asked my son to find her, and he literally it pulled out this like dust. And but there were 4 bits that survived, and I was like, oh my God. So I remade her, so there was Backhand Maiden the second. So she's just about, and she's travelled. She's been to the Met. Oh, girl's got around. She's had so much fun. But it has got to the point where if I wear it anymore, she'll like, I won't be doing her a favour. So that's when I was just like, And then Brisbane, where I first saw her. So she's the lady in that walking around she's the cheeky, she's a cheeky lady. So she's like, so another museum wanted to buy it, and I was like, no, it's not for you. So I'm quite fussy about where they go. It's got to have this genealogy. It's got to have a genealogy attached to it. So that museum, Goma in Brisbane, they were like, I said, that's her home, and then they've just purchased her, so she will be going about to retirement, and my mother's and I are going to start working on the third one, so that when I hand it over, we will exchange the moli, so then the avatar can again take it. So it's now become a real methodology that I'm starting to understand and can write about, and I really hope that it will be helpful in some form. But I've got lots to think about from this trip. There's a lot to think about. It's really good. I was just like Christian, loved the way he works, and so there's like, you can see he's got really fully developed ways of dealing with that space, but I still feel like what are we conserving in terms of performance? Yeah, and then when you deconstruct performance outside a Western sort of construct, then it gets even more interesting. Anyway, I'll stop.
This is fascinating. Could we make a pause very, very briefly? Is it possible? I'm just really sorry because I really have to go now. I don't know if my colleagues would like to stay for a few more minutes to.
Maybe just a couple more minutes if you.
Yeah, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
No, as long as you're okay, as long as you think there's something useful coming out of it.
Private, yes.
Oh no, I just.
Sorry that I have to run, but my little one has to be picked up. But I would be very interested in asking a question about the storytelling. The kind of indigenous, say, storytelling as a way of conveying knowledge and preserving this knowledge, and about the body as an archive as well. But perhaps it comes in the discussion, perhaps not. But if not, Rosanna, I'm just gonna. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It was amazing to have you, and let's just
You're okay, Fran?
stay in touch, and
Yep,
I
done.
won't be there tomorrow, but yes.
We will. It's not goodbye. I'll see you again.
Exactly. But I really mean that it was amazing to learn from you.
Oh,
Thank you so much for coming all this way.
Awesome. Brilliant. Bye-bye. Yeah, we won't be too long anyway.
Yeah.
Let's just discuss per email and catch up. We are almost done.
Yeah, and have a great trip, Hanna.
Yes,
You're
we
on
are
your way.
but
Yeah.
we'll be in contact per
Yeah.
email. I'm working tomorrow still.
Okay, yeah. Well, when you do travel, have a
Thank you very
wonderful
much.
time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh wow, yes. Take care.
I should get home in 20 minutes.
That's a good cue.
Let's not subject you to more than 20 minutes.
That's right. Let's go 15. Then we've got 5 minutes to pack up. Emilie, you can do the.
You're just still running, right?
Give me a fight, yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean, so this is a really important thing that has to be said, Rosanna. Maybe this wasn't clear. We didn't invite you so that we could help you figure out how to preserve performance. We invited you because that's what you're doing, and we want to learn from you. Your work is preserving performance. When you say to us, I'm sharing space with my ancestors, I'm bringing them into the present, we're like, we're taking notes.
Okay, oh my God.
know?
Yeah.
And this methodology that you've developed, this is like I don't even have anything remotely articulate to say. This is just like you're doing performance conservation. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think what you've triggered in me, especially because I really am interested in formalizing like the PhD, and I was just like, this is the area where I think I could really develop up because, I haven't, like in terms of the body as an archive, that's a really, it's not a new concept, but I think it's one that's going to be really valuable for not just living archives, but then how artists can actually find ways that make sense to them, that they can hand this archive over, whether it's to a family, whether it's to a box, whether it's to a museum, or whether you make that decision that it just doesn't need to be, and there's and I think as an as a performer that's done good 30 years now, there's definitely times where I've been like, I've taken up enough space in terms of like the next sort of crew coming through, but then I realised that in terms of storytelling, there's so many more stories, and as as in terms of conserving your performative body, that it's really important to keep it moving and try and so it's not just conservation as in the thing, but also like as in the body and how we look after it. That's why I think you got a really good lineup, and it was I think intergenerational was really important. Who were the two young girls? They were great, but they were like, you could see their brains going, and that's conserving, performance right there, because you're really stimulating artists into actually going, oh, this is actually important. See, nobody's told us before. That's why I think we kind of bumble around, and then you're like, you're interested. Oh my God, thank you. Like you're like, oh, it's a thing. Oh yeah, it's a thing. So that's why I was going. And we don't have. I can't talk like this to people in Aotearoa, not yet, because I think our performance art scene's quite small, and we don't really. We haven't had the opportunity to actually get together. I think when I first came home about 10 years ago, we had the Moana practitioners, and there was 8 of us in the room, and a few of them, because I'd been away for years, so like the young bloods, and then one of our artists, they didn't even know she did performance. Like they thought Pacific Performing Arts started in 2014 or something. All of a sudden you've got these older bodies going, oh, actually we did all this stuff back then, but it wasn't. We don't have any archives of it, therefore it didn't happen. So that's when we realised actually conserving performance in terms of is really important, especially for the younger generations. And I think Pascal mentioned that yesterday as well. I could see how she was really passionate about why the archive is important, because it's another tool that stimulates new creations, and that's what I was talking about. The VAR body is a really procreative body, because it can actually create, not just recreate, but it can actually, you can tell new stories through the old stories. That's why I think those 2 young cats, I was like, wow. And a lot of times that we were speaking the same language, especially reaching back into our whāngongoa, back into their folk, what is it? But see here, the value, it's where the mana is. Here, if you say, oh, I'm really interested in folklore or something, they just look at you like, oh, that's kind of quaint. Oh, what, Hansel and Gretel. Really important stories. Really important stories. That's the only way, that was part of my decolonization path, was reaching back into those old stories, and I sort of had to unpack a lot of the damage that had been done by missionaries and in the retelling to children. So, just like the Grimm, like when I read some of those, I was just like, oh, no wonder why we were scared. Far out, which is that we're going to eat you. We used to be like, wow. there's some, you know, so there's a lot of, not, I suppose it's dumbing down, that's why it is right, basically, yeah. So unless we really hold on and value, to me it's where the value is put, that then we'll still be, performing arts will still be kind of like the poor cousin, which is hard. You know, I've definitely, you know, I could have made a lot more. I mean, I don't own a house. My mum just gave me a car. Like, I'm in my 50s. But, you know, but I still feel like that I have $1 million lifestyle. And I love my life, and I actually love living my life. And I meet a lot of people who don't love their lives, but they've got heaps of money, you know, or they're really fabulous artists. But you know, there's a few decisions I've made along the way in terms of my practice and how I'm going to manage it. And I think it's now paying off now in terms of a conservation plan. Is that, yeah, but just standing in, we say standing in your own mana, you know, standing in your own power, in your own autonomy, in your own dignity. And a lot of Indigenous practice hasn't had that yet. We're just scratching the surface on that. So, but yeah, the power of the storytelling. It's yeah. We don't need any more Hollywood movies, do we? Really? Do we? Maybe a few. I really enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3. Oh, honestly, number 3, a treat. I loved it. It was just like, I was just like, in terms of storytelling and just pure magic, where you're in this whole other world, almost from the word go. Just put, you know, and you know, so that's one, that sort of storytelling, and then a lot of the and then what we do, just so yeah, really important stuff. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the lady who's written really well about the body as archive, and she's a queer. She's in charge of this archive, but some of her reading was, I read it too late with the MPhil. I'll get you her name. I think you'd like some of her reading and the thought she had on the body as archive, because I've maintained that. Just as I said, made you guys repeat, I am the ancestor. The ancestor is me. You know, that's that, you know. And I used to go, when I realized, I am the museum. The museum is me, because it's because we're sharing that space, and I think those were really powerful ways for me to inhabit that space with confidence. I was like, yeah, you guys may have all the structure, and you've got like the acid-free paper, and you've got the files, but you don't have this genealogical sort of connection. And I think that's what the body brings about when we go into those spaces. You guys will feel it when you meet collections. You know, when you go into old churches, old synagogues. You know, there's some powerful things wake up. That's making it tangible, which the museums seem to have a little bit of problems with.
Yeah, you know, when you said before, talking about your generation of performance artists, you said, you know, we don't have archives, we don't have documentation. Your ancestors in Samoa, they didn't have archives either, but that culture is still alive.
That's right, and they've passed that down to us, and we are the ancestors now. It's such an important thing. They're not back there in the past. That we are enacting them. That's our conserving. You know, it's by talk. You know, we say talk story. You talk story. It's really important, just like what we're doing. Except for I'm doing all the talking. Sorry. Must be our 15 minutes.
I don't want to, yeah, I'm sorry, Emily, I feel like I
That's a really good question, because like for my grandmother's generation, my father's generation, my great-grandmother's generation, and my great-great-grandmother's generation, maybe even one more, they did not have the ability to make educated choices about what they could bring on board to the way that they lived their lives. They got told, they got beaten, they got their, natural environment changed, so they really, and it came to my generation, and I think we were some, especially as sort of immigrants into Aotearoa, so it's not our homes, I'm part of the diaspora, I'm part of a transnational experience, but I was the one that kept asking questions, I was the one that kept sort of not being satisfied, and that is from the protest movements from America, from the Black Panthers. We had the Polynesian Panthers. That was off the back of all those activists challenging us to question what we took on board, what we bought, what we put on our bodies. Questioning the way we were educated, and that's what took me into where could I find it? Go ask my grandmother. She's like, "Ooh, what do you want to know that for? It's not going to be of any use to you," she used to say. Yeah, and you'd be sitting there, or some of the aunties that are so indoctrinated into the Christian world that they used to call me the pagan. That's the only way that they could kind of understand me and my questions and what I was doing. My grandmother wouldn't even tell us our Samoan name until she realised that I was working in a really Pacific community. And I remember the day she actually just looked at me and went, "Alaya sa from Falifa," and I was like, "Thank you," because until I had that information, I couldn't partake, because people place you by your mountain, by your waters. So that was so big for me, and so I went into the only place where I could really find as much as I could was our folk tales. What do they call them? Our mythologies. All those things that still imply that they're not real, that they're fantasies, they're fairy tales, but they hold immense truths, and that's the insight that I got to into maybe pre-contact sort of minds, especially for women. There was just, they had the most Pacific Island woman people kind of think of, is the long, dusky-haired maiden who's like selling you a holiday to Hawaii and hip shaking and passive yet sexually available, all those things. So it was when I started looking into our old whāngongo, into our whāngongo, I found ngā whānua, born of a blood clot, a warrior. Like I was just like, a warrior. She's got weapons that she developed. That when I looked at Tai Mātiri Whainga, I was saying they were men killers. They had several husbands with multiple children. I'm like, wow, girls, like, really? It's just like, now there's, Sina of, like, she slept with gods, she discovered new lands, her friends were the sharks, so it was the tale with the eel that I told today. So that is where I found these insights, and then it was translating into how it could actually mean something to me in the world I lived in, because that's the world they lived in. They didn't have to deal with traffic jams and all those other things. And I'm just so grateful that those stories were conserved. Some orally, so some I got to hear orally, and a lot of them through and mediated through the missionaries. So, but you kind of learn how to unpack that, right? It's like the tale of Sina and the eel. There's like, because I was brought up when I was young, and the eel and Sina, they were friends, and and then one day, like, they had a fight, and he smacked her, and like, so it's like in a young mind, you're like, oh, okay, I can relate to that. And as you get older, you're like, oh, oh, okay, they were friends. Like, they were friends with benefits, and that I know, right? So it's these retelling, and what elements you decide to tell, and that was with the aunties. Like when they'd sort of let their guard down, and they would actually tell you, like, some of the more intimate details, like he tickled her with his tail, and they'd be like this, and you'd be sitting there. And some of our knowledge holders, because a lot of the knowledge holders were really family by family, and it's in that video there was Tui Tamasese. He's one of our atua. He's like so important because he took the tapu off. He's like, we got to talk about this. You guys need to know your histories, because we were starting to really. He could see that they couldn't hold the door open, but he's only one kind of voice, where all the rest of them are trying to suppress it. So that was, and now it's sort of our responsibility to keep these stories alive in the imagination of the next generations. So I've sort of done successfully with my son, like his love of performance, of storytelling, and it's so funny sometimes I hear my own stories coming out of that mouth of his, but I'm like, wow, that's conservation at its best, because it's the next generation is solid in his grounding, and that's one of my best conservation projects, I think. So but that's such a valid question. How do you know what to keep? There's aspects of our culture that we did not need to keep. We did not need to keep public defloration of highborn women. We didn't need to keep that. It's something, but there's other aspects. But we, maybe needed to keep the technique of the special mat that she wore. Those sorts of decisions, because now, but that information, at least it has been stored in books by anthropologists, so it's a delicate dance. But I think when they're fully activated and realised, so they come off the page or out of those archives and into the hands of artists, who then, reimagine them. Yeah, that's some beautiful conservation. Might not have any relationship to what that actual, archive looked like. And that to me is exciting, because then you're not. I'll never forget my mate George Nuku, who actually made that beautiful tiki that I made. But he goes, which is, it could look like it came out of a museum, that tiki, but I never get him looking at this guy going, look, we're not Xerox machines, mate. We're not here just to. we're. So I'll leave it at that. We're not Xerox machines. Everybody's going, what the hell's a Xerox machine?
We're not that young.
Yeah, thank goodness. So when I looked at my kids one day and I went, and they were like, what was that? And I was like, oh, that was a Kodak moment. And I was like, oh, you have no idea what Kodak is. There's no film anymore, right? And that used to be an ad.